Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anne Florini. I'm the director of the Center on Asia and Globalization here at the Kuan School of Public Policy. I'm also a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., so I have particular pleasure in introducing today's speaker. Tom Mann is the W. Averell Harriman Chair and Senior Fellow in Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution in Washington. We've been colleagues now for several years. He has been at Brookings for a couple of decades now, and before that was Director of Governmental Studies at Brookings, or while he was there, was Director of Governmental Studies at Brookings for a period. And before that was Executive Director of the American Political Science Association. Tom is renowned throughout the United States for his expertise on all matters to do with inside the Beltway politics, Congress, and the federal government in general. For any of you who have spent time in the United States and listened to the radio station National Public Radio, you have often had the benefit of Tom's views on all of those subjects. We are going to be hearing from him today about a very timely topic, the presidential elections in the United States. Tom has a particular vantage point to address some of these issues, as he has worked very closely with John McCain on campaign finance reform, and has also worked closely with Barack Obama on a number of issues over the years. So we're very much looking forward to hearing how he can unravel the mysteries of the American presidential election for all of us. Tom?
Well, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you all. Thank you for coming to this lecture, and thank you, Anne, and in absentia, Kishore, for inviting me to be a visitor at the School of Public Policy for this week. It's my first trip to Singapore. I've learned a great deal already from many of you, and I still have a couple of days to go, so there's no telling what I'll be able to carry back to Washington by way of knowledge. But I really appreciate the gracious hospitality and goodwill of all of those I've come into contact with, and I thank you very much. It is really a crazy and interesting time in American politics. I haven't experienced an election season like this in my lifetime. I mean, candidates are up and down and alive and dead and alive again. It's amazing. In fact, I was just talking about this on the way over to the school with my taxi driver, Rudy Giuliani. You may have heard of him. Rudy spent most of last year sitting on top of the polls, believing he would pretty much win the primaries and the nomination in the state of Florida. But it didn't work out that well. Sometimes I wondered about the information and advice he was given. One day he got so excited when a staff member told him that he was up to 50% support. What they didn't tell him was that was strictly within his own family. But you got to give it to Rudy. You know, he's the kind of guy that you either love him or he hates you. That sort of feature of Rudy came through sort of loud and clear. But now, out of the ashes has arisen Senator John McCain, who was supposed to have been dead, declared dead in the summer. Michael Huckabee is a bit of an annoyance. He won't go away, but McCain's nomination is certain. People have made wisecracks about his age. He, if successful, will be the oldest person to first take office in the White House in American history. But McCain's no dummy. He figures, well, why don't I turn my age into an asset? I'm going to really increase my support among seniors. So he was out on the campaign trail and went to a nursing home, went up to the first person he met there and said, "Do you know who I am?" This woman thought for a moment and said, "No, but if you ask at the front desk, they'll tell you." Well, listen, we have the results in of the Tuesday primaries, the primary in Wisconsin, and even the caucus in Hawaii, and the hope of Hillary Clinton to kind of somehow sneak up in the last couple of days, intensify the campaign, and pull off a surprise has been dashed. The margin was very high. It's going to end up being something like 59-41 for Obama in the vote. In Hawaii, it'll be more like 3-1, 75-25, but that's his home base in a caucus state. The Wisconsin primary is unique. Hillary left the state before they started counting the votes, and once the outcome was apparent, gave a very, very tough speech, did not acknowledge the voting in Wisconsin, did not congratulate her opponent, but talked about the differences between them and the fight she intended to go forward with in Ohio and in Texas. Now, I, of course, listen to this and I start thinking, what is really going on in her mind? I know she's saying this. That's what she feels she has to say. But what is she thinking? And then, of course, I had a story to recall, a story told by the funniest man ever to serve in the United States House of Representatives, Morris K. Udall. Mo Udall from Arizona, a Democrat, decided to run for president in 1976. He thought he was a pretty classy politician, and he was, and there was no dominant figure in the race. He had a reasonable chance, so he announced his candidacy and got out there, started running. First event, New Hampshire primaries, beaten by this unknown former governor from a southern state. I think his name was Carter. One Jimmy Carter, lost by 2 or 3 points, but Udall said, there's more to come, and the primary schedule then moved south and up toward the Midwest, and every primary he found himself coming in just behind Jimmy Carter, 2 or 3 points, and he knew he had to break through if he was going to be able to sustain the candidacy, and finally the great progressive state of Wisconsin appeared on his schedule. He campaigned hard. The response of the crowds was fabulous. Election night, the returns started coming in, and he jumped into a lead. He was a happy man, but in those days, and sometimes these days, the returns are a little slow coming in, especially from the rural areas, and his staff finally said, Congressman, you have to go to bed. You have to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. We'll keep an eye on this and wake you early in the morning when everything is in. Udall slept like a newborn. That means he woke up every 30 minutes crying. But alas, a staff member poked him about 6 a.m. and the news was not good. The late returns were from the rural areas. Jimmy Carter won those overwhelmingly. He jumped ahead and won the Wisconsin primary. Udall acknowledged that it was over and said, schedule a press conference. So he appeared a couple of hours later and began it with these words: the people have spoken, the bastards. I wondered whether I'd get a laugh on that in Singapore, but believe it or not, that's what he said, and it's so refreshing to have a politician who speaks his mind. And maybe Hillary would have gotten a much better response if she had had a reaction something like that. But listen, we're in the midst of at the end of a 10-state run for Barack Obama, starting immediately after Super Tuesday. He has won and won decisively in virtually every event. It's been such an exciting election. And I suppose the reason most Americans feel good about it is because you could characterize it as a triumph of voters over pundits and pollsters. So many of the things that were said to be were not to be, and until such times as voters weighed in, we didn't really know what was going to happen. But if you look at all of the indicators of citizen interest, the audiences for the debates, the number of people showing up at campaign events, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, 25,000, it's not something we're used to in our presidential primary process. The number of donors, new donors, contributing less than $100, some sending in $10 a month over the internet to their favorite candidate, and then to the extraordinary turnout we've seen in almost all of the primaries and caucuses, setting records in every case. Now, I say this is so exhilarating because it's such a contrast with the foul, almost toxic air surrounding American politics and American public life in recent years. It has truly been a downer for us, and we've been a downer for you and other parts of the globe. It's been a very difficult period. Let me just remind you of some of the indicators of that atmosphere. Right now, 3/4 of Americans believe the country is seriously off on the wrong track and not moving in the right direction. A vast majority believes our economy is in serious trouble. Most immediately now believe we are either already in a recession or about to fall into one, but quite apart from that's the macroeconomic downturn, Americans have had anxiety about their economy for years. Yeah, we've had sustained GDP growth and relatively low unemployment rates, but if most Americans don't know what the GDP is. They look at things like how much money is in their paycheck, how much money in their pocket and household account, what is the price of gas and health care and college tuitions, and how much is the interest rate on the balance of my mortgage or my credit card, and how secure do I feel about health care coverage and pensions in the face of a lot of turmoil within the job market itself. We have been in a very unpopular war for many years now. It's a war that has seen some reduction, significant reduction in violence in Iraq, but that's relative to the extraordinarily high levels that occurred the year before. And in the face of this, American public opinion hasn't moved one iota in terms of their assessments of whether the benefits outweigh the cost. To the contrary, 65% of Americans believe the costs greatly outweigh the benefits, that it was a mistake to go into Iraq, and that we should, in relatively short order, but in as responsible a fashion as possible, extricate our combat troops from Iraq. We have record low levels of public trust in government. We have record low levels of presidential approval. George W. Bush has matched the records of our most unpopular presidents with sustained low job approval ratings that have been stuck in the low 30s now for well over a year, and much longer than that, below 50%. But of course, we also have record low approval ratings for the United States Congress, which which in the middle of last year matched the lowest rating that Gallup had ever recorded. Americans do not think kindly about politics, government, and public life. Now, with this, we have a lame duck president who's sticking to his principles with no one listening. It's as if Americans, have their TiVo and they treat his public utterances as they treat ads they don't want to see in between favorite shows. They've just turned off and stopped listening. The president's State of the Union speech and his budget message reflected that commitment to principles, sort of political calculations, and not a single incentive for Congress to do business with him apart from the immediate macroeconomic stimulus package. What's needed, of course, is sort of more microeconomic measures to deal with the specifics of the credit crisis in our country, and that's much harder to reach any compromise on. We've had a frustrated Democratic majority in Congress coming in after the 2006 elections, hoping to alter the course in Iraq and proceed with a number of other important domestic policy initiatives. The president outfoxed him on Iraq. He did change policy, but he increased our military presence rather than decreased it. But it was sufficient to keep Republicans from deserting him, which they were on the verge of doing, and basically gave him a free hand in his remaining months in office. So that's the context in which we look at this presidential election. But there's one other very important element, namely a country that has been characterized as red and blue, as the 50-50 nation, as a country evenly balanced between the Republican and Democratic Party. We have shifted to one with now a distinct, if not overwhelming, Democratic Party advantage. Every indicator that we political scientists can find, whether it's party identification, assessments of the public as which party is best able to handle the most serious problems confronting the country, of how they would vote, if you will, generically, that is, for the Democratic or Republican candidate for president, for the Democratic or Republican candidate for the House of Representatives. And those measures produce typically 15 percentage point advantages for the Democrats. Some have suggested if only the Democrats could find a generic candidate to run without a name, a history, a background, they would sweep the elections in November. But alas, they're going to come forward with a real live person. If you look at retirements from office are always a very interesting indicator of how a party feels about its future. Right now, in the Senate, with a third of the seats up, the 35 seats up, 23 are held by Republicans, only 12 by Democrats. And 5 or 6, if you count Trent Lott, who's already retired and left the Congress, have left, retired, or are leaving, and they're all Republicans in the Senate, all Republicans. In the House, so far, we have 29 Republican retirements announced to 6 Democratic retirements, and half of those Republican retirements are in potentially competitive districts. If you look at fundraising by the two parties, especially for the House and the Senate, you see the longtime Republican advantage dramatically reversed. Other indicators, levels of interest, engagement, optimism about the election, all show clear Democratic advantages. If you then shift to the coalitional bases of the parties, you look at the youngest cohort, at Latinos, at singles, at upscale professionals, you will find the shifts seemingly steady and accumulating and potentially inexorable, pointing out that in spite of the geographical shifts in the country from the Northeast, Midwest to the South and Southwest, which should advantage Republicans. The fact is, if you look at the political sentiments of growing parts of the electorate, you will find that they are very much trending toward the Democratic Party. And if you look at the religious community, the famed religious right has become much more diversified in its agenda, caring about poverty and AIDS around the world, caring about climate change. It's fascinating to see the diversification of the agenda of the so-called religious right, as well as a mobilization of other religiously committed and practicing people with agendas more akin to the Catholic social justice movement than to those, say, associated with Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell. And if you look at states like Virginia and Colorado, New Mexico, and New Hampshire, Iowa, and Ohio, you see in all those states a shift toward the Democratic Party. It's interesting. Who would have guessed the state of, or Commonwealth of Virginia, which was clearly a part of the traditional South, has become the most promising opportunity for a Democratic pickup in the South of any of those states. It's really quite a remarkable change. So, a foul public mood, a situation in which we have a president and a Congress who have no incentives to talk with one another or deal with one another, an underlying shift toward the Democratic Party, and then comes one of the most exciting presidential elections, which at least offers the possibility of Americans regaining their spirits and America presenting itself in somewhat different ways around the world. Now, this nominating process has been fascinating for many reasons. You've heard ad nauseum that it's the first election in which in November there will be neither an incumbent president or vice president on the ticket. The first election basically since 1928, when no incumbent president or vice president didn't run at all. It's a process in which the reformers went wild again and created the Tsunami Tuesday, a front-loaded schedule, all of which was designed to close it out quickly on behalf of a favored candidate. But alas, it's a process that's complicated. We have caucuses and primaries that are opened or closed to non-party members. We have so-called unpledged or superdelegates. We have, in the end, the power residing in national party conventions. We have differences between parties and among states on rules for allocating delegates by party that sometimes requires, if not a PhD, a master's in accounting or finite mathematics to keep up with it. It's an election in which the candidates started very early, giving new meaning to the term permanent campaign, in which the amount of fundraising and spending has dwarfed any previous efforts. Both Clinton and Obama raised $100 million each in 2007. Mitt Romney raised 80, but about half of that was from his own checking account. Giuliani about 65 million. Pretty soon we're going to be talking about real money invested in these campaigns. We've had all but John Edwards reject the public financing, and we've seen huge disparities. Much more money being invested on the Democratic side of the contest than on the Republican side. And in terms of turnout, we've seen sort of striking differences. So far, we're close to sort of 2 times as many Democrats showing up in the primaries and caucuses as Republicans. To give you an indicator, Wisconsin is truly a purple state, a very competitive state that votes Republican in presidential elections on occasion. Obama is won with between 58 and 59% of the vote. McCain got 55% of the vote, but Obama gained 3 times as many votes as McCain, and Clinton got 2 times as many votes as McCain. The turnout there on the Democratic side was quite extraordinary. Now, whether that's predictive of the general election is debatable, but it's showing up again and again. That's where the enthusiasm and interest is. Final point of a general sort, people have complained that, voters aren't selecting candidates based on the issues. They're selecting them based on personalities. Isn't that terrible? Well, no, it's not terrible. It's perfectly rational, and let me tell you why. The differences among the Democratic candidates on major issues are very modest. It's really hard to explain how Clinton and Obama differ on most of the issues. I can come up with a part of their health care plan that's different. Whether you have an individual mandate to purchase insurance or not, but basically they agree. The same thing is largely true on the Republican side and was true. If you look at positions of John McCain that he's talking about in the campaign, it's hard to differentiate from Mitt Romney or Rudy Giuliani. Under those circumstances, the most rational thing for voters to do is to look at the individual, take a reading. Who are they? What are their values? What kind of conception of leadership do they have? How likely are they to be elected? How likely are they, if elected, to succeed in governing? I mean, these are important things and much more important than minor differences among them on the issues. But that will all change once each party has its nominee. Then we will see an ideological gulf as wide as any that we have in American politics. The worldview, the operating political ideology of, say, a John McCain and a Barack Obama or a Hillary Clinton are enormous. Yeah, the realities of the world and policy making constrain what they can actually do in office, but the conception of what to do is hugely different, which means that the general election campaign that will commence as soon as both parties have their presumptive nominees will feature much discussion about what to do about the economy, what to do about health care, what to do about energy and climate change, how to clean up the mess in Iraq, what to do about the Taliban in Afghanistan, what to do about trade policy, how to deal with China in this new world, and a zillion other issues. Now, let me say a couple of words about the Republican and Democratic contest, and then a few concluding words about the general election and what I see as the future of American politics. The point to emphasize on the Republican side of the field is that, unlike past presidential elections, there has not been an heir apparent, a candidate who naturally garnered the support of the various constituent groups within the Republican Party, as defined by Republican rank-and-file voters. They just simply have not been attracted to the field. Some have been enthusiastic about their candidate, but they comprise a very small fraction, each group of the electorate itself. No candidate has been able to unite the party factions, and all have problems and had problems. Most are now gone. The one who began with perhaps the most promise was Mitt Romney, a man of seemingly attractive, intelligent, articulate, with amazing experience in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. He just seemed like a natural. And yet this man was seemingly so insecure, he would try to ingratiate himself with anyone who claimed to be a potential voter in a Republican primary or caucus. You want this? You got it. You got it. There was no way of discerning who he was, what he stood for, what his campaign for the presidency was about. It was so sad to see all that, and I felt so badly for his oldest son. I mean, $50 million of that fortune down the tube, you know. But there's more where it came from. Rudy Giuliani, I thought Senator Joe Biden had the best line in the debates about Rudy Giuliani when someone asked about him. Doesn't he really experience in national security? Biden said, "Give me a break." He said, This man speaks only in the following sentences: a noun, a verb, and 9/11. He was the 9/11 candidate. But if you looked at him, yes, he had successes in his first term in New York. His second term was polarizing and quite destructive, and left a bit of a fiscal mess for Mayor Bloomberg to clean up. Basically, he's sort of dispositionally unsuited for the office in these times. It's black and white, friends and enemies. So you either love him or he hates you. That's his mode of operation. And with his very complicated personal and professional lives, never seemed a natural for this. Everyone looked to John McCain initially, but McCain pretended he was the heir of George Bush and hired all of his political consultants and ran as a front runner and looked just awful. Spent about $40 million in a matter of months on high-priced consultants, and until someone told him he was broke. And his standing in the polls had sunk by about 20 percentage points. He withdrew, quietly fired up the Straight Talk Express, started appearing in town hall meetings in New Hampshire, and eventually emerged, largely because he was the only adult standing in the race. He's not beloved by Republicans. He's actually liked more by independents and some Democrats. He's a conservative man with strong views, but he's a man of enormous character, and someone who's willing, with some issues, to go against his party, whether it's on immigration or torture, certainly campaign finance, climate change. He is different, and yet on the core elements associated with George W. Bush, tax cutting and budget deficits and the war in Iraq, he is absolutely arm in arm with him, which suggests he's going to have a burden as he tries to mobilize the base of the party, and as he embraces unpopular positions now associated with a very unpopular president. Will his strength among independents and weak Democrats hold up? Big question. In any case, the very fact that Huckabee is able to stay in and attract 20, 25, 30, 35% of the vote when the conclusion is foregone suggests to you there are a lot of unhappy campers. Democratic rank-and-file voters were much happier with their field. They thought there were 6 or 7 perfectly able candidates. I mean, the strongest who didn't get the recognition was Mike Gravel. I mean, he was a great statesman, I'm just kidding. He was, oh, it's so embarrassing that they let him participate in the debates. But the fact is, the second tier of candidates, Senators Dodd and Biden and Governor Richardson, had the most experience, more than Clinton and Obama, and were quite able. But the race quickly settled on the previous candidate, John Edwards, and VP nominee, and the two celebrity candidates, Clinton and Obama. We went through different stages. Clinton as the front runner, Obama's pre and post Iowa surge cut short in a matter of days with Clinton's New Hampshire surprise, then that South Carolina landslide for Obama that former President Bill Clinton probably contributed markedly to, then a race to Super Duper Tuesday in which no candidate had the knockout punch. That was originally Hillary Clinton's firewall, but Obama ended up winning more states and actually the same number of delegates and the same number of total votes. Clinton won the mega states of California and New York, of course, her own state, but won New Jersey and Massachusetts. But Obama won a combination of states, his own, of Illinois, states in the South, states in the Rocky Mountain areas, and all of the caucus states. But there we were. Money was rolling in for Obama. Get this, he raised $100 million in 2007. About 30% of that came from donors of less than $200. With Clinton, it was 14% during that year. But in the month of January, he raised $32 million, 1 month, 28 million of which came over the internet in small donations. It just flooded in. He's now collecting more, apart from fundraisers, than $1 million a day on the internet. So that money is no problem. Clinton raised $14 million in January. That should be a triumph, but she was short of money, had to lend her campaign some money. After Super Tuesday, some of the funding picked up, but she now trails and is at a clear disadvantage as well. Moreover, Obama always planned for the post-Super Tuesday events that stretched over several weeks, invested heavily in organization and advertising, and now has swept the deck, leaving Hillary Clinton in a position where if she doesn't 2 weeks hence win Texas and Ohio convincingly, she's probably in a position where she will have to fold the tent, either explicitly or implicitly. Some other real concerns here for her is that she's really had a advantageous demographic advantage. She was the one who attracted core Democrats, low education, low income, seniors, Catholics, women, and those who are really core Democrats. And the feeling was that as they moved to different territory, including Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas to some extent, and she did well with Latinos as well, that this would become an advantage. But we saw in Virginia and Maryland, and now yesterday in Wisconsin, that those demographic advantages have diminished greatly. I've been looking through the exit polls. Obama tied with Clinton among women. It was 50-50 in Wisconsin. He won 67% of the men. For the first time, he tied with Clinton among Catholics. He won the lowest income group, those who have only a high school education. If you look across the range, he still has his advantage among those with higher incomes and more education. The youngest cohort voted about 73% for him. Men Independents, African Americans, much smaller segment of the Wisconsin electorate, but he won 90% of them. But in addition, he won middle-aged voters. He only lost those 65 and older. Every other age group he won, although there's a perfect linear relationship between age and support for the two candidates, with every age group right on the regression line, if you will. It's analytically clean and pure, and it does suggest that what has happened, here's my hypothesis, that the ones who paid most attention to the campaign early on were those with most education, higher income, more time, more likely to read papers and watch news. They're the ones that got all caught up in the Obama candidacy. The ordinary people who have to go to work and put food on the table and don't really have time to read the paper or watch the news or choose not to are relying on history and their own experiences, which with the Clintons were really very favorable among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents. But now as the campaign begins to pick up and more information gets through, some of these same voters are more open to an Obama candidacy. And if you look in the exit polls, you will find that among Hillary Clinton voters, the vast majority would be perfectly happy with an Obama candidacy, but the reverse is not true. It's as much significantly smaller, 20 percentage points smaller among Obama voters who would be satisfied with a Clinton candidacy, partly because he's pulled new people into the electorate who haven't had the same kind of experience and associations with the Clinton. So we're really getting a change now that does not bode well. So if you look at demographics, if you look at money, if you look at zeitgeist, who seems to fit the times? What does the country care about and think about? Yeah, change, that's sort of a banal word in and of itself, but what rather the appeal is to, can't you turkeys get us out of these sort of mindless ideological fights? The triumph of ideology in American politics has been its bane. It has been so destructive of sensible, reasonable policy making, and Obama says offers a way out of it. Whether it's practical and doable or not, we don't know, but it's inspirational and hopeful, and he connects in a way with a zeitgeist that Clinton does not. Clinton is doing more ideological positioning, sort of making sure she's seen as strong on national security and reasonable on a whole host of sort of ideological matters, but the country really was very happy with most of the Clinton years. They were good years for America, both domestically and internationally, but it's tough to go back now and claim credit and say you want to go back to the 90s in an atmosphere where Americans say, yeah, the country was in pretty good shape, but public life was pretty ugly. It was nasty, and people were going at one another. We want something different, and I think that is the advantage that has now come through. It's moved forward in stages. Clinton is very able, very intelligent, very knowledgeable, and if she didn't sort of have these, ironically, if she hadn't been married to Bill Clinton, the odds are she wouldn't have become, the early front runner had she not lived through those experiences. But now that comes back almost to be a ball and chain on her legs that keep her from taking advantage of connecting with what the public now feels strongly about. So I think it's always a bad idea to make predictions about the future. It's much easier about the past. I have to tell you, I've been wrong in a lot of elections, but I kind of scoped out a Obama-McCain contest not months, but even years ago, and I think it's coming to that. I think it will be in many respects uplifting because these men are so different. The greatest age gap we've ever had in American elections, very different worldviews, public philosophies, ideologies, policies, preferences, but they're both men of real character and substance. They each have fascinating biographies. In fact, McCain's candidacy is primarily a candidacy of biography and character and reputation for straight talk and a maverick candidate. Anyone who read Obama's first book knew this was a very unusual person, and then seeing him in a sequence of public events, beginning really with the 2004 Democratic Convention, knew this was a unique figure in American public life. We had him over to Brookings shortly after he was elected to the Senate to kick off our election reform project. He gave a kind of a keynote speech before a group like this. It was fine, but nothing to write home about. But then the strategy was that my colleague Norm Ornstein and I sat him down, and we sat on either side and peppered him with questions for about a half hour before we turned to the audience. And to see the way he managed those, and the thoughtfulness and the absence of if you will, cassettes that he would plug in to respond to questions, suggested to us this was a very unusual person. Mind you, Hillary Clinton sort of comes and gives a talk and answers questions, and she can be dazzling in a policy sense as well, very intelligent, knowledgeable, but you sense sort of something really different. McCain is someone I've worked with on campaign finance reform, and it's just been a pleasure to see someone who sticks to his principles, who's got guts, who's prepared to make enemies and fight the good fight. I think there's a chance both of them could agree to a very unconventional series of debates and discussions, unmediated. No Chris Matthews allowed. No reporters to try to turn an innocent question into a provocative got you kind of question, but rather a discussion of the differences and similarities that actually exist between these two candidates. Now, if American history is any guide, the Democrats will win in November. That is to say, we just have never returned a party to power in the middle of a recession or a period of deep economic anxiety with a very unpopular war, with an issue agenda that works very much to the advantage of the opposition party at a time when Americans are shifting their allegiance to that opposition party, the Democratic Party, and when the so-called preferences and generic votes all overwhelmingly favor the Democratic Party. Also, we have a situation where it's almost inevitable Democrats will gain seats in the House and the Senate. But that's a longer story. We don't have time for it. The only way in which the Republicans could win and hold the White House for 4 more years is if some unforeseen event that just somehow alters the whole calculus, but it's hard for me to conceive what that would be. Not the capture of Osama bin Laden, it's been too late. A terrorist strike at home, you might get a rally effect for 3 or 4 days, and then questions about the behemoth Department of Homeland Security and what it's been up to and how this whole process has been managed. I think rather it will be real asymmetry in the level of trust and confidence in the two candidates, where if it's McCain and Obama, where McCain is seen as so much more reliable and trustworthy and knowledgeable on national security policy that overwhelms the other issues, and Obama is somehow cast as a waif amid forces, someone whose inexperience and lack of sure-footedness would make many Americans very insecure about that. Now, what are the chances that that's going to happen? Not high. They are not non-existent, but they are not high. The number one issue on the minds of Americans is the economy and domestic policy, and their view of the Republican advantage on national security has been dashed in the killing fields of Iraq and Afghanistan. There is no longer the assurance that toughness and resolve and commitment to win is sufficient. It might take some smarts as well to make correct decisions. So, in any case, it will be a fascinating election. The safe bet is Obama wins the nomination and wins the general election. If he doesn't, by the way, it'll either be close because some of those personal factors really weigh in McCain's advantage, or it'll be a landslide Democratic victory because Obama emerges as the more attractive candidate, and he's got that whole referendum element issue agenda working on behalf of him and his party, which would produce, if not a popular vote landslide, an electoral college vote landslide. Those are two possibilities. The third is McCain ekes out a narrow victory based largely on his biography and character, in spite of the fact that he is embracing positions that are very unpopular with the broader public. Now, my view, obviously, is that one of the former scenarios is likely to play out. I believe the era of dominance of conservative movement and conservative ideas in America, which really have captured American public life for a long period of time, has largely run out of steam, and that we're in a new period in which either the Democrats seize the opportunity to move ahead, build a larger and somewhat more durable majority, and begin to confront these hellish problems with no easy solutions that will be very hard to manage, or we will see ourselves move back and forth with Democrats having a marginal advantage in the Republican Party beginning to remake itself. It's a challenging time for policymaking, whatever the outcome of the election. Uncertain time for who will prevail in the future, but right now the wind is at the back of the Democratic Party and its likely nominee, Barack Obama, and those winds will most likely blow strong through the November elections. Thank you very much.
Tom, thank you very much for a fascinating overview of where American presidential politics stands. We now have about half an hour for questions and answers. I'm going to usurp the first question, and it's going to be a slightly technical question because I want to take advantage of your expertise in the area of campaign finance. If you look back in American history at presidential elections between candidates of very different views, one of the ones that comes to mind is the 1960 election between Nixon and Kennedy. And many people call that the first television election, because in the debates between Nixon and Kennedy, people who listened on the radio and could not see Nixon or Kennedy tended to think that Nixon won the debates. People who watched on television thought that Kennedy, who was much more physically prepossessing, won the debates. One of the very striking things in your comments was about Barack Obama's fundraising, particularly recently. How much of that is coming in small increments over the internet. Is this the first internet election, and what kind of impact is that going to have on big money politics in the United States going forward?
It is one of the most encouraging developments in American politics. Money in elections is inherently problematic. Every society has economic inequality, but a quest for political equality. And countries do it differently. There are democracies in Europe where all campaign advertising is prohibited. You can't buy television time to run ads. Can you imagine doing that in the United States? It would be so clearly a violation of our First Amendment free speech clause that you don't do it. Other countries limit the size of contributions, limit the amount of money that candidates, parties can spend, proscribe certain kind of campaign activities. Japan is especially notable for this. They tell you exactly where you can stand on your campaign vehicle during the campaign period. But in America, with a strong tradition of First Amendment rights, the courts have been very aggressive in limiting the regulation of money in politics. And we have a long history forbidding corporate and union treasury funding of elections, but then there are ways around that. We set up a system of contribution and spending limits and limited what individuals could spend on their own behalf, and the court declared that unconstitutional. Over time, you try to regulate, and then other forms of fundraising and spending emerge, and people get very discouraged about the role of big money in politics, special interest influence, money buying outcomes, which is why it's so encouraging to see the possibility of a mobilization of individual donors. It began in a serious way with John McCain's first campaign in 2000 against George Bush. He raised some millions of dollars over the internet after his surprise victory in New Hampshire. But then it fell by the wayside. But the technology was building, the infrastructure was building, so that by 2004, Howard Dean set a new standard for fundraising, which John Kerry then captured after he won the nomination. And the money that flooded into Kerry and the Democratic Party was really quite extraordinary. But this year, it's gone further. The year began with all of the candidates raising most of their money in the maximum contributions, which is now $2,300. They got friends called bundlers to go ask their friends to contribute to candidates and set up elaborate pyramid organizations to raise money. Most of the money in 2007 was raised in large contributions, 1,000 to the max of $2,300. 83% of Clinton's money was raised in this fashion, and Obama's early on was close to 75 or 80%. Some others it was 90%. But toward the end of the year, you saw that begin to shift. With Obama, a little less with Clinton, and then in January now, it's just utterly taking off. And it raises the possibility, as far as fundraising is concerned, that one can actually raise significant amounts of money for campaigns without throwing yourself at the mercy of large donors. But in addition to that, Anne, there are signs of campaign activities beyond fundraising that offer even greater hope of reducing the role of money in politics. I mean, you ask yourself, what have been some of the most influential campaign activities this year? And they've been activities not run by the candidates or the parties, but by individuals. It's YouTube. It's the creation videos, of really good music videos, of capturing candidates in moments they'd rather not be captured, which then take on a life on the internet. So it's decentralized, the process. It involves many more people, but now clever candidates are figuring out ways of taking full advantage of this. Their web-based staffs are becoming more sophisticated. They're allowing much more freedom. They're not trying to control everything. And more they're putting out their own videos for circulation on the internet. It's amazing. Some things, the word spreads so quickly, so within a matter of hours, a particular video might be seen by tens of millions of people. It's stunning. So I think we are just in the early stages of a transformation of political communications that worry some people, but as for me, I think it's exceedingly promising and offers a way around a purely regulatory approach to the role of money in politics.
We can now throw it open for questions from the floor. When I call on you, if you can please go to the microphone, just give your name and please keep your question or comment quite brief. We'll start with Simon.
Simon Chesterman from the law faculty here, also working for New York University. I followed the election relatively closely, even at a distance. My favourite candidate was John Edwards, but obviously he withdrew despite injecting some of the real ideas, I suppose, in the Democratic Party. An attractive young white guy can't get a break.
Well, exactly. You saw at that one debate, Obama said, "You're kind of the odd man out here, Edwards. You know, what's this white male stuff?"
I wanted to ask you about race and the election. In particular, in the Democratic primary, it came up as an issue, notably in New Hampshire, with the disparity between the polling and the results, and the way it was invoked in the South Carolina debates. How you think that's going to play in the federal election, assuming Obama is nominated? It's
a very interesting and important question. I think we're garnering more and more information about how it's likely to play. In America, we call it the Bradley effect. After Los Angeles Mayor Tom Bradley ran for governor of California several decades ago, went into the election with double-digit lead in the polls, and when the votes were cast and counted, he had lost. David Dinkins dropped 15 percentage points from the pre-election polls to the final count in the election. Harold Washington, mayor of Chicago, had a huge lead and barely won the election. The feeling was there were some voters who were embarrassed to say they would not vote for an African-American candidate, but in the polling place did so. Other theories were that those people who were inclined not to vote for a black candidate were less likely to respond in interviews, and therefore, even though you'd do the demographic weighting, it didn't capture this effect. But in more recent times, we've seen the emergence of very different African-American candidates. Harold Ford in Tennessee was one. He lost the election. He ran for the Senate, but he did better in the actual vote than he did in the pre-election polls. And we saw Duval Patrick, governor of Massachusetts, and you began to feel as if an emergent type of candidate, if you will, a Tiger Woods-like candidate, someone who was more biracial, who didn't come out of a civil rights tradition, who didn't make explicit racial appeals, could actually be quite successful. But we don't have any serious test of it nationally. Now, with the New Hampshire result and the dramatic difference between pre-election polls and votes, one of the working hypotheses was just this, a sort of latent racial vote. But the best analysis that's been done of that suggests something very different, that in fact it was Clinton supporters, longtime supporters, who wavered after Iowa and got kind of interested in Obama, but then returned to their more favorite candidate, especially when she was beat up by the guys in the last days of the campaign. There were no real other differences that suggested this sort of racially determined vote. And then if you look in South Carolina, it was just the opposite. Obama's level of victory there and support among white men was much higher than the polls had indicated. And now in the subsequent events on Super Tuesday, on the Potomac primary in Maryland and Virginia, he won a majority of white men in Virginia. You begin to feel as if this pattern from the past may not repeat itself this time. My guess is the people who are discomforted by the idea of an African American as president are probably people who would not otherwise vote for him, either dispositionally they're strong Republicans or geographically they reside in red states that aren't going to vote for any Democrat for the White House. So at least for now, ironically, the evidence is increasingly suggesting that that gender may be a bigger obstacle than race, that problems of Hillary among men may be greater than problems that Obama experiences among whites.
Richard Hartung, if we look at the consequences of the election a little bit, what do you think the 2 or 3 things that Obama would do differently are that he could actually get through Congress?
What he gets through Congress is a big, big question mark. By the way, the rhetoric of bringing us together and sort of bipartisanship is really a more rhetorical than a strategic action. What Obama is trying to do is increase the size of public majorities for policies and public philosophies that he advances. That is, he's trying to enlarge the Democratic coalition to a point at which they could actually once again do business with Republicans in serious negotiations. But they've got to have a big enough lead to provide incentives to those Republicans to not stick with their party in hopes that a defeat for the Democrats will put them back in the majority. That is, you need enough of a majority to both have the self-confidence to extend the offer to negotiate and have enough willing members of the minority party to play ball with you. And that is, basically, that's the strategy. That's why he talks about, unless you create a political movement, unless you change the broader political environment, you're not going to make much progress. If you have to work within the current confines in Washington where the majorities are narrow, where the parties are so polarized, even a different presidential approach will not necessarily pay dividends. George Bush was very much a divider, not a unifier, and in sticking to his ideological principles, he ensured that Democrats would not be pulled into a series of negotiations. It succeeded in his first term in getting him policies he wanted, and then the fruits of those policies came back to haunt him in the second term, and his diminished standing kept him from moving ahead on immigration, on reform of Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and a host of other matters. So I was so interested in elaborating that. Now, give me the thrust of
once he's in office.
What specifically could he do? My guess is that one of the first things you'll see, because it's where he potentially could sort of make the difference, is international. That's where he seizes on the opportunity to have the world take a different look at us, to try to build on that in some significant way. As far as he's going to have to face the reality of a decision on Iraq very early, and to deliver on a mandate will have to begin an orderly withdrawal of troops. He can do that largely on his own. In any case, there will be broad support in the Congress to do it. The more interesting and important question is whether there is a pivot to Afghanistan, the reallocation of military resources, and whether there is a serious effort to work with what will by then be a new government in Pakistan to make a serious move in the western frontier areas against Taliban and Al-Qaeda. My guess is, in terms of the aggressiveness of a foreign policy move, it'll be in that arena. On domestic policy, something has to be delivered on health care, but to reach too high is to probably be defeated, and to have an early loss would be really quite devastating. So my guess is he will begin the process of negotiation with the Congress on health reform, but in the meantime find some other areas of sort of second-tier issues. It won't be immigration. It won't be reforming Social Security and Medicare. He will start with some tax policy changes that he can get through. He will gear up the sort of climate change negotiations, but again, it will take some time. He'll undo some executive orders in the environmental arena. He will probably take a more aggressive stand vis-a-vis the sort of credit crunch and the problems of mortgage foreclosures. Those are the areas I see him moving on. The thing is, first impressions are sometimes lasting ones. If you bite off too much and fail, then it weakens your ability to move with other things. On the other hand, it's a wonderful opportunity to get something done and make an impression on the country and the world. And so you got to figure out what's achievable that will make a difference and set the conditions under which you can move ahead. I am convinced that none of the major problems we face with energy and climate change, with healthcare access, quality, cost, with long-term fiscal problems, with immigration, can be resolved without building some support in the opposition party as well. And those are going to take negotiations. So what he ought to be doing is throwing out rose petals to the opposition, trying to set a tenor in which they are part of the governing process and not the enemy.
In the middle here.
Hi, I'm a student here in LKY school. Just two short questions. First one is about Obama. Given to his relatively younger age and less experience in politics, what kind of what part of his personality or character that you think enable him to have such an excellent performance in the primary so far? The second one is about the foreign policy. Between McCain and Obama, are there many major differences in their policies on China? If they are, what are they? Thank you.
It's a very interesting question about Obama's particular appeal. By the way, the press in America has now decided that the current storyline is that it's all style, no substance. You know, it's about promises but not solutions. that's playing well in the activist elite, but it's not resonating in the broader public very much. I think it's the fact that he is he's attractive, he's articulate, he has some charismatic qualities, and that he intuits what people are feeling. We're kind of tired of being down on ourselves and depressed about the state of public affairs, and perhaps more than any other candidate, he's tried to respond to that. So he kind of figured out what the sort of country was looking for, and he did it early and sort of tried it out. It's not a storyline he created last year. He's been peddling this since he's sort of gotten into politics, and it just seems to work. And it comes in a package of someone who's sort of young and kind of daring, African American, a real African American father, and a background. That's so different from what we're used to. I think all of those have served him well. Whether that carries forward through the rest of the election and allows him to avoid the frustrations and defeats of many of his predecessors in office is very much an open question. This is a human, not a godlike figure with his own shortcomings and frailties. But he also seems to be a man who's very comfortable with himself, who went through the trouble of figuring out who he was and what he was about, who made decisions about that and is acting on them. He's very ambitious. You can't do the things he's doing in the time he's doing them without being enormously ambitious. But it seems, not to be to feed some psychological need, but because that's what he wants to do, to make a rich life. And people sort of sense that level of comfort with himself and his own skin. On Obama and McCain and foreign policy, there certainly are sort of differences. McCain is much more inclined to turn first to military action, and Obama's inclination is that sort of war is awful and one never knows the ultimate outcome, but sometimes it has to be fought, but it should be seen as more last resort than first resort. So their instincts on how to confront Iran, for example, and whether or not a military victory in Iraq is possible are really quite different. But in other areas, there's not necessarily a great difference. When George Bush came into office, the lodestone of his foreign policy was ABC, anything but Clinton. If Clinton did one thing with North Korea, then we had to do something else. And the same with, now Clinton had a fair amount of that when he started too. Every American president always takes a while to get the story on Taiwan straight, and they always get into trouble with China at the beginning and then gradually sort of work out some accommodation. I would argue that the Bush foreign policy has been most successful in Asia. I'm not saying completely successful, but sort of by and large, I think they made mistakes in North Korea and not following up as Colin Powell wanted to do initially, and there have been some other missteps, but things have been managed pretty well. And I think Obama and his foreign policy advisors believe that continuity is okay across administrations on some aspects of foreign policy. So I do not anticipate big changes if Obama is elected, or if McCain is there. I mean, what Obama hears from his advisors and what he believes is, with China, we are both competitive and we are cooperative. We aren't one or the other. We have multiple relationships. China will grow and will become a dominant power. We're not going away anytime soon, and we're going to have to work out some accommodations. There's a lot of domestic political pressure because of our economic imbalances with China now. They've replaced Japan as the focus of that domestic political anxiety. And but my guess is both McCain and Obama would work to contain kind of punitive measures coming out of Congress in the short term by trying to develop longer term approaches that might ameliorate some of the most pressing problems.
We are almost out of time, and I'm going to grab the last question as well as the first, because I want to talk about the person you haven't talked about. I think your diagnosis is right, and it is likely to end up being an Obama-McCain race. But Hillary Clinton is not out of the running yet. If she wins solidly in Texas and Ohio on March 4th, what would a new Clinton White House look like? And in particular, what should she do with Bill?
That's a question a lot of people have been asking over time. It is true. Even though Obama has won 10 events in a row, his lead among delegates is without the superdelegates, the unpledged delegates, it's about 150, and with the superdelegates, Hillary has a lead of anywhere from 50 to 80, and so you can see the delegate lead is very small. And if Hillary revives her candidacy over these 2 weeks and blows them away in Texas and Ohio, this race is going on. And you could imagine a good victory in Pennsylvania, but Obama's certainly not going to collapse. It's hard to close the gap, but you could end the race with them very close, and in that case, superdelegates would play a role, as would a potential credentials challenge in Michigan and Florida, and it could be messy, but there is still a scenario for a Clinton nomination. It's worth. The election is a little more problematic, but given the broad advantages favoring Democrats, Clinton should be able to win a modest victory, although it's a tougher sell, in my view, than Obama. But let's assume all those things happen. What would her presidency look like? I think many of the faces would be familiar ones. Many of the people active in the campaign were active during the Clinton years in the White House. I think she would send Bill out for extensive travels around the world, and she'd send chaperones to accompany him to prevent adverse press coverage while she's trying to set the proper tone in Washington. I mean, Bill Clinton is an immensely intelligent, talented, political talent, of the likes of which come around only every once in a while, and yet you just can't have two for one. It's just not something Americans like. And the only way they could countenance having Hillary as president is if there's one Clinton in the White House, and he may be there socially, but he's running his foundation and doing his other things. Obviously, he would quietly consult. He's mainly a good political analyst and consultant, although he made a very bad decision in the weeks leading up to the South Carolina primary, and obviously change that radically, but the damage was done already. I would see it as a government and a cabinet of immensely intelligent, knowledgeable, skilled, and experienced people, many of whom have served in office before, that would be coming up to higher levels. A little less risk, sort of proven players, knowledgeable, sensible. But some, like Gene Sperling, economic advisor, who was there the whole Clinton tenure, all 8 years, would be back, and that's a wonderful thing because he's such a combination of honest, decent policy analysis and smart about politics and making things happen. So they'd be different. I think Obama would make the more dramatic moves to appoint some Republicans to prominent positions. I could imagine Chuck Hagel as Secretary of State in an Obama administration, but I think Clinton would probably pick someone she's sort of closer to and more comfortable, and a Democrat. I think her greatest challenge would be trying to keep a Republican Party from falling into an opposition mode against her, and therefore she would use any means at her disposal to try to lure them in by bringing them into some early conversations. But it won't be easy for her to do that.
Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time, although I think we could continue the conversation for quite a while. So I'd like to ask you all to join me in thanking Tom for a wonderful presentation.